fluorescent lights above hummed their eternal song. That flat, monotonous drone that seemed to seep into your bones during the dead hours between midnight and dawn. Have you ever stopped to consider what happens in the spaces you never see? What unfolds in hospitals, warehouses, gas stations, and office buildings when the sun abandons the sky and most of humanity surrenders to sleep? Tonight, I'm going to share 6 encounters from those who work when the world sleeps. Stories that might make you reconsider ever taking the graveyard shift. These aren't tales passed down through generations or urban legends whispered around campfires. These are recent accounts from real people who clocked in when darkness fell and discovered that night shift work reveals a world operating on different rules entirely. Before we begin, ask yourself this: if you were utterly alone in a building designed for hundreds, and you heard footsteps that weren't your own, what would you do? Would you investigate, or would you pretend you heard nothing at all? Story 1. The hospital corridor. Zoe had been a night shift nurse for 3 years at County Memorial Hospital before the incident in the pediatric wing. She'd grown accustomed to the peculiar atmosphere that settled over hospitals after visiting hours ended. That heavy quiet broken only by the beeping of monitors and the whispered conversations of other night staff. But nothing prepared her for what she encountered on a Tuesday in October. The pediatric ward occupied the 4th floor, a space decorated with cheerful murals of cartoon animals and painted clouds that looked sinister under the emergency lighting that kicked in after midnight to save energy. On this particular night, Zoe was assigned to room 404, monitoring a 7-year-old girl named Emma, who'd undergone an emergency appendectomy. Emma slept peacefully, her small chest rising and falling in the dim glow of the monitors. At approximately 2:15 a.m., Zoe heard it for the first time, the unmistakable sound of a child laughing. Not Emma, who remained deeply asleep. The laughter came from the hallway, high-pitched and gleeful, the way children laugh when they're playing chase or hiding from each other. Zoe stepped into the corridor, expecting to find a young patient who'd wandered from their room. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, those cheerful murals now seeming to watch her with painted eyes. She returned to Emma's room, dismissing it as sound carrying strangely through the building's ventilation system. But 20 minutes later, the laughter returned, closer this time, accompanied by the soft padding of small footsteps on linoleum. Zoe's skin prickled. She checked Emma again, confirming the child remained asleep, then moved to the doorway and peered out. What she saw made her blood freeze in her veins. A small figure stood at the far end of the hallway, silhouetted against the emergency exit sign's red glow. It appeared to be a child, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. The figure stood perfectly still, facing Zoe's direction. In all her years working nights, Zoe had developed an instinct for when something was wrong, when a patient was deteriorating or a situation was turning critical. Every fiber of her being now screamed that she was looking at something fundamentally wrong. "Hello," she called out, her voice sounding thin and small in the empty corridor. "Are you okay, sweetie? Are you lost?" The figure tilted its head, the gesture somehow more disturbing than anything else. Too slow, too deliberate. Then it laughed again, that same gleeful sound, and took a step toward her. Then another. Then it began to run. Zoe stumbled backward into Emma's room and slammed the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pressed her back against the door, listening. The footsteps grew louder, faster, accompanied by the terrible laughter, coming closer and closer until they should have been right outside the door. Then they stopped. Complete silence fell over the ward. Zoe stood frozen, barely breathing, waiting. Minutes passed. Finally, she gathered her courage and cracked the door open. The hallway stood empty once more. But when she stepped out, her foot landed in something wet. Looking down, she saw a small, child-sized footprints on the floor, glistening in the dim light. Not water. The footprints were wet with something darker, something that pulled in the small indentations. They led from where she'd seen the figure standing all the way to Emma's door, then stopped abruptly. The next morning, Zoe reported the incident to her supervisor. The woman's expression changed as Zoe described what she'd seen. After a long pause, the supervisor pulled up records on her computer and turned the screen toward Zoe. In 1987, a 6-year-old boy named Michael had died on the 4th floor, drowning in the hydrotherapy tub when a nurse briefly stepped away. The tub had been improperly filled, and the boy had slipped under the water. His body wasn't discovered for nearly 20 minutes. "You're not the first to see him," the supervisor said quietly, "and you won't be the last. He appears about once every few months, always between 2 and 3 a.m. We've tried blessing the floor, having mediums come in, everything. Nothing stops him. He's still playing, still looking for someone to play with him." Zoe transferred to day shift the following week. But here is what haunts her most. The footprints she saw weren't just leading to Emma's door. When maintenance reviewed the security footage the next morning, trying to find a logical explanation, they discovered something that made them shut off the cameras on the 4th floor permanently. The wet footprints, visible only as dark spots on the black and white footage, didn't stop at Emma's door. They continued inside, circling the sleeping child's bed 3 times before leading back out and vanishing at the spot where Zoe had first seen the figure. Emma had no memory of the night, but when her mother came to take her home 2 days later, she mentioned something strange. Emma kept talking about the night's boy who visited her room and told her stories while she slept. The boy in the wet hospital gown who promised he'd come back to play with her again someday. Story 2. The warehouse worker Marcus worked the overnight shift at a massive distribution warehouse in rural Pennsylvania, one of those sprawling facilities that stretch across acres of land, filled with towering shelves stacked 50 feet high with merchandise, waiting to be shipped across the country. The warehouse operated with a skeleton crew at night, just for people scattered across a space that employed 100 during the day. Marcus's job was simple: drive a forklift up and down the aisles, retrieve items marked on his digital scanner, and deliver them to the loading dock for the morning trucks. The warehouse was climate controlled but never quite warm, maintained at a constant 55 degrees to preserve the goods. Marcus wore his company jacket even in summer. The overhead lights, triggered by motion sensors, would activate as his forklift approached and shut off 30 seconds after he passed, leaving vast sections of the warehouse in darkness. This created an effect Marcus described as driving through a tunnel of light, with an ocean of darkness on either side. He'd been working there for 6 months when the incidents began. It started small. Items he carefully stacked on his forklift would be missing when he reached the loading dock, forcing him to return and retrieve them again. He'd find his lunch moved from where he left it in the break room. Tools would vanish and reappear in illogical places. Marcus assumed he was working too hard, getting careless, letting exhaustion affect his memory. Then came the night he saw the figure. Marcus was deep in aisle 47, 40 rows back from the main thoroughfare, retrieving a pallet of engine parts. The shelving units rose like metal cliffs on either side of him, creating a canyon of merchandise that stretched away into darkness. As he maneuvered his forklift, his headlights swept across the aisle ahead, and he saw someone standing there. The figure stood completely motionless, positioned in the center of the aisle about 50 feet away. Marcus assumed it was Jake, one of the other night workers, though something felt off about the silhouette. The figure's proportions seemed wrong somehow, too tall and too thin, with arms that hung slightly too long at its sides. "Jake," Marcus called out, his voice echoing strangely in the cavernous space. "That you, man?" The figure didn't respond. It simply stood there, perfectly still, facing Marcus's direction. The forklift's headlights illuminated it clearly now, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. This wasn't Jake. This wasn't anyone he recognized. The figure appeared to be a man, but his features were difficult to make out, blurred somehow, as if Marcus was looking at him through a dirty window. He wore what looked like old work clothes, coveralls or a uniform of some kind, but the fabric seemed faded, colorless. "Hey," Marcus shouted, louder now, "you're not supposed to be in here. This is a restricted area." The figure took a step forward, then another. It moved with a strange, gliding gait, as if its feet weren't quite touching the concrete floor. Marcus threw his forklift into reverse, the machine beeping its warning signal as he backed away. The figure continued advancing, picking up speed, its pace faster than any person should be able to walk. Marcus spun the forklift around and accelerated, racing back toward the main aisle. Behind him, he could hear footsteps, impossibly loud, echoing through the warehouse like drumbeats. He didn't dare look back. The motion sensor lights ahead of him flickered to life as he approached, while those behind him shut off, plunging his pursuer into darkness. But the footsteps continued, keeping pace with his vehicle. He burst out into the main thoroughfare and slammed on the brakes, breathing hard. The footsteps stopped. Silence flooded back into the warehouse, broken only by the hum of the ventilation system and his own ragged breathing. Marcus sat in his forklift, hands trembling on the controls, staring back at aisle 47. The lights there had shut off, leaving only darkness. He grabbed his radio. "Jake, Martinez? Anybody copy?" Static crackled, then Jake's voice came through. "Yeah, I'm here. What's up? Where are you right now?" "Aisle 12. Why, you sound weird, man. Is Martinez on the floor?" "No, he's in the break room. It's just you and me out here." "Why?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't explain what he'd seen, couldn't find words that wouldn't make him sound insane. He signed off and sat there, trying to calm his pounding heart. The next night, Marcus did research during his break. He searched through old company records, looking for anything unusual about the warehouse's history. What he found made his skin crawl. In 1993, before the current company occupied the building, it had been a different kind of warehouse, a storage facility for a manufacturing plant. A night shift worker named Robert Jameson had died there under mysterious circumstances. He had been found in aisle 47, his body discovered by the morning crew. The official report stated he'd suffered a heart attack, but the report notes mentioned strange details. Robert had been found standing upright, his eyes wide open, hands clutched at his chest, and there had been footprints around his body, dozens of them, pacing in circles, as if something had walked around and around him as he died. Marcus tried to quit the next day, but in rural Pennsylvania, jobs weren't easy to find. He needed the paycheck. He stayed, but he never went down aisle 47 again, refusing any retrieval orders that would take him there. His supervisor eventually stopped assigning him to that section, though she never asked why. Other workers began reporting similar encounters, a figure standing motionless in distant aisles, watching them, footsteps echoing through empty corridors, the sensation of being followed through the darkness. Management installed additional lighting and cameras, but the cameras never captured anything unusual, just empty aisles and shadows. Marcus still works there, 5 years later. He's developed a routine, a set of rules he follows religiously. He never works alone in the deep aisles. He keeps his radio on at all times, and most importantly, when the lights shut off behind him and he hears those footsteps beginning again in the darkness, he drives faster and never, ever looks back. Because once, just once, he made the mistake of glancing in his side mirror, and in that brief glimpse, he saw something that still haunts his dreams. The figure wasn't walking anymore. It was running, its two long arms pumping at its sides, its blurred face split by what might have been a smile, gaining on him with impossible speed, as if it had been waiting all these years for someone to finally turn around and acknowledge his existence. Story 3. The gas station on Route 9. Jennifer took the overnight shift at the quick stop on Route 9 because it paid an extra $3 an hour and she desperately needed the money. The gas station sat isolated at the intersection of Route 9 and Old Mill Road, surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and facing a stretch of highway that saw minimal traffic. Between midnight and 6 a.m., the building itself was a relic from the 70s, all harsh fluorescent lighting and faded linoleum, with 2 gas pumps out front that still had mechanical number wheels that spun when customers filled their tanks. The job was simple but lonely. Jennifer's responsibilities included managing the register, restocking shelves, cleaning, and staying alert in case any customers needed assistance. On most nights, she might see 5 or 6 customers total, usually long-haul truckers or insomniacs making late-night snack runs. The rest of the time, she was alone with the hum of the refrigerators and the buzzing of the lights. She'd been working there for 2 weeks when she noticed the car. It was a sedan, dark blue or black, hard to tell under the parking lot's sodium vapor lights. The car would pull up to the far pump around 1:30 a.m., and someone would get out and begin pumping gas. This wasn't unusual in itself. What disturbed Jennifer was that the person never came inside to pay. She'd watch on the security monitor as the figure, always wearing a long coat with the collar turned up, would finish pumping, return to the car, and drive away. The pump's display would show $0, as if no transaction had occurred. The first few times this happened, Jennifer assumed it was a glitch in the ancient pump system, but it kept happening every single night, always at 1:30, always the same car. She reported it to her manager, who checked the books and confirmed that no money was missing. He suggested the pump might be malfunctioning and said he'd have someone look at it, but nothing ever came of it. Then Jennifer made a mistake. She decided to confront the customer directly. When the car pulled up on a Thursday night, right on schedule, Jennifer grabbed a flashlight and walked out to the pump. The air outside was unseasonably cold, her breath forming clouds in front of her face. The figure stood at the pump, back turned to her, had pulled up against the chill. Jennifer could hear the mechanical click 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 of the pump's numbers spinning. "Excuse me," she called out. "Sir, Mom, I need you to come inside to pay." The figure didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge her presence. The pump continued its clicking rhythm. Jennifer stepped closer, close enough now to see that the person's coat was old-fashioned, something from decades past, with a style that reminded her of photos from her grandmother's youth. "Hey," she said, louder now, reaching out to tap the figure's shoulder. "I said you need to come inside." The moment her fingers made contact with the coat, the pump stopped clicking. The figure went rigid. Then, slowly, impossibly slowly, it began to turn toward her. Jennifer stumbled backward, her flashlight beam sweeping wildly. Where the person's face should have been, there was nothing. Not a blur or a shadow, but literally nothing. An absence so complete that her mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The figure's hood framed an empty void, a darkness deeper than the night around them. She ran. She didn't remember crossing the parking lot or entering the store. But suddenly she was inside, slamming the door and locking it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn the deadbolt. Through the window, she watched the figure slowly turn back to the pump and resume filling the tank, as if nothing had happened. The car drove away at 1:45, exactly as it had every previous night. Jennifer called her manager, then the police. The officer who arrived 40 minutes later was sympathetic but skeptical. He checked the pump and found nothing unusual. He reviewed the security footage, but the camera covering that pump had mysteriously malfunctioned, showing only static during the time period in question. The officer suggested it might have been a prank, someone in a mask trying to scare her. But Jennifer knew what she'd seen. The void where a face should have been wasn't a mask. It was an absence, a wrongness that made her eyes hurt to recall. She wanted to quit, but jobs were scarce and rent was due. She stayed, but she never went outside after 1 a.m. again. She watched on the working monitors as the car arrived like clockwork, as the figure pumped gas that registered as nothing as it drove away into the darkness. Sometimes, when the store was particularly quiet, she'd hear the click 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 of the pump running, even though the monitor showed no one there. One night, a trucker came in around 2 a.m., a regular who'd been stopping at the quick stop for years. He bought coffee and a sandwich, and as he was leaving, he paused at the door. "You ever see that old car out there at night?" he asked. "The blue sedan." Jennifer's blood went cold. "You've seen it too." The trucker nodded. "Been seeing it for about 15 years now. Every time I pass through around 1:30. Always the same car, same pump. Had a buddy who used to work here back in the 90s. He told me it's been happening since before this place was a quick stop, back when it was just Joe's Gas and Service. Do you know what it is? The trucker was quiet for a moment, staring out at the empty parking lot. My buddy looked into it once, went to the library and everything. Found out that back in 1952, there was a car accident right at this intersection. Sedan ran out of gas and stalled on the highway. Got rear-ended by a truck. Driver died instantly. They said the impact was so severe they couldn't identify the body. Couldn't even find all the pieces. He turned back to Jennifer. That driver died running on empty, trying to make it to a gas station that didn't exist yet. I figure they're still trying to fill up, still trying to finish the last trip. Some folks just don't realize they've reached the end of the road. Jennifer works there still, though she's looking for new employment. The car continues its nightly visits, an eternal loop playing out under the fluorescent lights. She's developed a routine. She keeps the door locked after 1 a.m. She doesn't watch the monitors during the 15-minute window, and she absolutely never, under any circumstances, goes outside to investigate. But there's one detail that keeps her awake during her days off. One thing she noticed on the security footage from the working cameras. The car's license plate is visible as it drives away. She ran the numbers once, out of curiosity. The registration came back to a 1951 Chevrolet Deluxe, reported as totaled in 1952. The registration is still active. Technically, that car never stopped being on the road, and every night, it still searches for the gas it never got, driven by someone who doesn't know they've been searching for 73 years. Story 4. The office building's cleaning crew. David worked as part of a 3-person cleaning crew for a 12-story office building in downtown Seattle. The building housed various businesses, law firms, consultancies, and tech startups, all of which emptied out by 7 p.m., leaving the space to the cleaning crew that arrived at 10. David had been doing this work for 2 years, and he developed a comfortable routine with his co-workers, Maria and Tom. They'd split up the building by floors, each taking 4 levels, meeting up around a.m. to finish the common areas together. The building itself was unremarkable, built in the 80s with that characteristic bland corporate aesthetic of beige walls and gray carpeting. During the day it buzzed with hundreds of workers, but at night it became a maze of dark cubicles and locked offices, illuminated only by the emergency lighting and whatever lights the cleaning crew turned on as they worked. David always took floors 9 through 12, the top levels. He preferred it up there, away from the street noise. Just him and his vacuum and the Seattle skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. He'd plug in his headphones, put on a podcast, and work his way through the offices systematically. On a Wednesday in November, David was vacuuming the 10th floor when he noticed something off. One of the office doors stood open. This was unusual because all offices were supposed to be locked at night. The employees responsible for securing their spaces before leaving. David poked his head in, intending to just close the door and move on. The office was small, barely more than a cubicle with walls, containing a desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet. Papers littered the desk, and the computer was still on, its screen showing a spreadsheet filled with numbers. A coffee mug sat beside the keyboard, steam rising from its surface. Fresh coffee. In an office building that had been empty for 5 hours. David's skin prickled. He stepped into the office, calling out, "Hello, is someone working late?" No response. The office was empty, but that coffee was definitely fresh. He could smell it, and when he cautiously touched the mug, it was hot. He backed out of the office quickly, pulling the door closed behind him. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone and called Tom. "Hey, you didn't see anyone coming, did you? Anyone working late on 10? No way," Tom replied. "Building's locked up tight. We're the only ones here." "Why?" David explained about the office. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, "Get out of there. Come down to 6. We need to talk." When David met up with his co-workers on the 6th floor, Maria and Tom exchanged glances. Finally, Maria spoke. "Which office was it?" 1014. Maria's face went pale. That's Cheryl's office. Who's Cheryl? Was Cheryl? Tom corrected. She worked here about 6 months ago. Accountant or something. One night she was working late, stayed past midnight finishing some big project. Had a deadline. Couldn't leave until it was done. Security found her the next morning. Heart attack, they said. Died right at her desk. David felt his stomach drop. And no one thought to mention this before. We didn't want to freak you out, Maria said. Besides, nothing's happened since then. The office has been empty. Building management couldn't get anyone to lease it. People felt uncomfortable, you know. They decided to stick together for the rest of the night, all three of them working the remaining floors as a group. But when they passed office 1014, they could see light beneath the door. The sound of typing echoed from within, fingers striking keys in a rapid, desperate rhythm. David wanted to run, wanted to leave, and never come back. But they had a job to finish. They kept working, ignoring the sounds coming from 1014. The typing that continued without pause, the occasional creak of a chair, the sound of papers shuffling. At 5 a.m., just as they were preparing to leave, the typing stopped. David, against his better judgment, opened the door to 1014 one last time. The office was dark, the computer off. The coffee mug sat on the desk, empty and cold. But the papers that had been scattered across the desk were now neatly stacked, organized into precise piles. And on top of the stacks sat a completed spreadsheet, printed out, dated November 13th of the current year, filled with numbers and calculations that meant nothing to David. At the bottom of the last page, in the margin, someone had written in neat handwriting, "Finally finished. Thank you for letting me complete my work." David quit the next day. Maria and Tom stayed on but requested to be reassigned to different buildings. The company hired a new crew for that office building, but they've had trouble keeping anyone long-term. Workers report the same phenomena. Office 1014 with its fresh coffee and running computer, the sound of typing that never stops. The presence of someone working desperately to finish a project that has no deadline anymore. The building's management eventually sealed off the 10th floor entirely, claiming structural concerns. But the real reason circulates among the cleaning crews throughout the city. Some workers, they say, are so dedicated to their jobs that even death can't make them leave the office. They just keep working, night after night, trapped in an eternal overtime shift, forever trying to meet a deadline that will never come. Story 5. The All-Night Diner. Rachel had worked as a server at Mel's Diner for 3 years when she took the overnight shift. The diner was a classic establishment, operating 24 hours a day, every day of the year, serving eggs and coffee to anyone who walked through the door. It sat at the edge of town, near the highway, catching travelers and insomniacs in equal measure. The overnight shift was quiet, usually just Rachel and Bobby the cook, serving maybe a dozen customers throughout the entire night. Rachel didn't mind. The tips were decent, and she enjoyed the peculiar characters who populated the diner between midnight and dawn. Truckers, night shift workers ending their shifts, college students pulling all-nighters, people running from or towards something they couldn't name. But there was one customer who troubled her. He always arrived at exactly 3:30 a.m., always sat in booth 7 by the window, and always ordered the same thing, black coffee and apple pie. He was middle-aged, maybe 50, with graying hair and glasses. He wore a suit that seemed slightly out of fashion, carried a briefcase, and never spoke beyond placing his order. He'd sit in that booth for exactly 30 minutes, drinking his coffee and eating his pie with methodical precision, then leave a $5 tip and walk out into the night. This routine had been happening every single night for the 3 years Rachel had worked there, including weekends and holidays. She never thought much about it until one night when a regular trucker named Pete came in around 4 a.m., just as the suit-wearing customer was leaving. Pete watched the man exit, then turned to Rachel with a strange expression. "You still get that guy, the one with the pie?" "Yeah, every night like clockwork. Why?" Pete shook his head slowly. "That's impossible." "What do you mean?" "I've been running this route for 20 years. stopping here probably 3 times a week. That same guy has been coming in at 3:30 for at least that long. He hasn't aged a day. Same suit, same briefcase, same everything. Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. She never paid attention to whether the customer aged. People came and went, and her mind categorized regulars without analyzing them too deeply. But now that Pete mentioned it, she tried to remember if the man had ever looked different. He hadn't. He looked exactly the same as the first night she'd served him 3 years ago. That night, Rachel decided to break protocol. When the man sat down at 3:30, she brought his usual order without asking, then lingered at the table. "Excuse me, sir, I hope you don't mind me asking, but you come in here every single night. I've never seen you miss a day." The man looked up at her, and Rachel felt something wrong in his gaze, something hollow and distant. "I'm waiting," he said simply. "Waiting for what?" "For someone who's supposed to meet me here every night." "For how long have you been waiting?" The man's expression didn't change. "I'm not sure anymore." "A long time. They said they'd meet me here at 4 a.m. I always arrive early, have my pie and coffee, and wait, but they never come. Still, I have to keep trying. What if tonight's the night they show up and I'm not here?" Rachel felt sympathy mixing with unease. Maybe they're not coming. Maybe it's time to stop waiting. The man smiled, but it was a sad smile, devoid of warmth. "I can't stop. This is what I do. This is all I do." He finished his pie at exactly 4 a.m., left his $5 tip, picked up his briefcase, and walked out. Rachel watched him cross the parking lot and get into a car, an older model sedan that looked like something from the 90s. The car pulled out onto the highway and disappeared into the darkness. Rachel mentioned the interaction to Bobby, who'd been working at Mel's even longer than Pete had been trucking. "Oh yeah, the waiting man," Bobby said from the kitchen. "He's been coming here since before I started, and I've been here 35 years. Old Mel, the original owner, he told me about that guy. Said he started coming in sometime in the late 70s. Always the same story, always waiting for someone. That's impossible. He'd be ancient." Bobby shrugged. "Look in the photo albums under the register. Mel kept pictures of the diner over the years. Check out the ones from the 80s. Rachel found the albums, old vinyl-bound books filled with Polaroids and newspaper clippings documenting Mel's diner's history. She flipped through the 80s section and stopped cold. There, in a photo dated 1984, was a shot of the interior of the diner. And there, sitting in booth 7, barely visible in the background, was the man. Same suit, same briefcase, same pie and coffee. She kept flipping. More photos from the 90s, from the early 2000s. In every photo that showed booth 7, if you look carefully, you could see him there, unchanged, eternal, waiting. Rachel researched the diner's history during her break. She found a newspaper article from 1979, a small piece about a local man named Richard Pearson who'd gone missing. Richard had told his family he was meeting someone at Mel's Diner at 4 a.m. to discuss a business opportunity. He'd left his house at 3 a.m. and was never seen again. His car was found abandoned near the diner a week later. No sign of foul play, no evidence of where he'd gone. The case went cold. The photo accompanying the article showed Richard Pearson. He wore glasses and a suit. He looked exactly like the man who ordered pie and coffee every night at 3:30. Rachel tried talking to him again the next night, tried to explain what she discovered, but he didn't seem to hear her. He just ate his pie, drank his coffee, and at 4 a.m. precisely, he left, always leaving, always returning, trapped in a loop of waiting that had lasted 46 years. She still works at Mel's Diner. The man still comes every night, an eternal customer keeping his appointment with someone who will never arrive. Rachel has stopped trying to help him. Some people, she's learned, are so committed to their routines that they become the routine, repeating the same actions forever, unable to deviate, unable to accept that what they're waiting for is never coming. But here's what haunts Rachel most. One night, she noticed something new. When the man left at 4 a.m., she watched him walk to his car. But instead of driving away, He just sat there behind the wheel, completely still. At 3:15, he got out of the car, walked back into the diner, and at 3:30, he sat down in booth 7 and ordered pie and coffee. He wasn't driving home between visits. He was just sitting in his car in the parking lot for 15 minutes, then coming back in. An endless loop, no beginning, no end, just waiting and pie and coffee forever and ever, a ghost trapped not by chains or curses, but by hope, by the belief that tonight might be the night his appointment finally arrives. Story 6. The security guard's last round. Thomas worked as a security guard at Riverside Plaza, a sprawling shopping complex that had seen better days. Once a thriving mall, it now stood half empty, with closed storefronts outnumbering active businesses 3-1. But the complex remained open, and someone had to patrol it at night, checking doors, watching for break-ins, maintaining the illusion of security. Thomas worked alone from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., walking the same route every hour through empty corridors and past darkened shop windows. His footsteps echoed on the tile floors, accompanied only by the hum of the heating system and the occasional buzz from dying fluorescent lights. He'd been working there for 6 months when he began to notice the changes. Small things at first. A toy store that should have been dark would have a single light on in the back. A clothing store's mannequins would be arranged differently than he remembered from his previous round. The food court would smell like fresh coffee, even though all the vendors had been closed for hours. Thomas assumed the building was settling, that his memory was playing tricks. That set was carrying from somewhere else. But the incidents escalated. One night, during his 2 a.m. round, Thomas heard music. Not modern music, but something old, tinny, like it was playing from a distant radio. He followed the sound to the center of the complex, where a large fountain sat dry and silent. Having not run in years, the music seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. A big band tune from the 40s or 50s. The music stopped when Thomas reached the fountain. Silence rushed back in, oppressive and complete. He stood there, breathing hard, his flashlight beam sweeping across the empty space. Then he heard footsteps. They came from above him, from the second level that ringed the central atrium. Thomas turned his light upward and saw someone walking along the upper level, a silhouette moving with purpose from store to store. His radio crackled. "Thomas, you there?" It was dispatch, the night operator who monitored his check-ins. Thomas grabbed his radio. "Yeah, I'm here. We have someone in the building, second level, heading toward the north wing." "That's impossible. Alarms are all active. No one could get in without triggering something. I'm looking right at them." Thomas ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He reached the second level and emerged into a corridor lined with empty shops. No one. The hallway stretched away from him, completely vacant, but he could still hear footsteps moving away, always just out of sight around the next corner. He pursued them through the complex, calling out, demanding whoever it was identify themselves. The footsteps continued, unhurried, methodical, as if whoever was walking didn't care about being followed. Thomas chased them through the north wing, past the abandoned apartment store, through corridors he'd walked 100 times. The chase led him to a section of the mall that had been closed for renovations years ago and never reopened. A chain-link fence blocked the corridor, a sign warning authorized personnel only. Thomas stopped, breathing hard. The footsteps had stopped too. Then he heard voices, multiple people talking and laughing, the sound of a crowd. It grew louder, surrounding him, the noise of hundreds of people shopping and socializing and living their lives. Thomas spun around, his light cutting through the darkness, but he was still alone. The voices came from everywhere, echoing off the walls. A phantom crowd populating the dead mall as quickly as it started. The noise stopped, silence again, and in that silence, Thomas heard something that made his blood freeze, his own footsteps, echoing from somewhere behind him. He wasn't moving, but he could hear boots on tile, the exact rhythm of his own walk, moving toward him. Thomas ran. He didn't care about protocol, or investigating or anything except getting out. He ran back through the corridors, down the stairs, across the central atrium, and out the main entrance into the cold night air. He stood in the parking lot, gasping, his radio squawking with dispatch asking what was happening. He couldn't explain it. He returned to his post, finished his shift, and in the morning, he submitted his 2 weeks' notice. But before he left, Thomas did research. Riverside Plaza had been built in 1967 on the site of an older shopping district that had burned down in 1965. The fire had started in the early morning hours when the complex was officially empty, but witnesses reported seeing people inside the building as it burned, shadows moving behind the smoke-filled windows. By the time firefighters controlled the blaze, they found 3 bodies, a security guard who'd been making his rounds, and 2 others never identified, possibly homeless people who'd broken in seeking shelter. The security guard's name was Thomas Whitmore. Thomas reads that article on his last night working at the plaza, and he understands now what he's been experiencing. The complex isn't haunted by one ghost, but by the memory of itself, by the echo of what it once was and what it might have been. The footsteps he heard were his own, from a different Thomas walking rounds in a different time. The music and the voices were memories of when the place was alive, played back like a recording. But here's the truly terrifying part. When Thomas walks his final round on his last night, he sees someone waiting for him in the central atrium, a figure in a security uniform standing by the dry fountain. The figure looks exactly like him. It doesn't move, doesn't speak. It just stands there, watching, as Thomas backs away slowly. He leaves Riverside Plaza and never returns. But sometimes he wonders about that figure. Was it showing him his future? What he would have become if he'd stayed? Or was it showing him the truth? That he'd been walking those rounds as a ghost all along, trapped in his own loop, unaware that he'd already reached the end. The mall is scheduled for demolition next year. Workers have already started prepping the site, but they refuse to work at night. They've heard the footsteps, the music, the phantom crowds, and they've seen the security guard still walking his rounds, still checking doors, still protecting a place that died decades ago and just hasn't realized it yet. These 6 stories share a common thread. The night shift reveals truths about our world that daylight hides. When most of humanity sleeps, when buildings empty and darkness falls, different rules apply. The boundaries between what is and what was become permeable. The dead sometimes forget they've died, and those of us who work while others sleep might encounter the truth that our reality is thinner than we believe, that the past never truly passes, and that some routines become so ingrained they continue forever, playing out in empty corridors and silent rooms, waiting for someone to witness them and carry their stories back into the light. So ask yourself this: if you work the night shift and you see something that shouldn't be there, hear something that makes no sense, feel a presence that has no source, what will you do? Will you investigate, or will you follow the first rule of surviving the graveyard shift? Some things are better left unexamined, and some questions should never be asked. The choice is yours. But remember, the night shift workers know the truth. The world you see during the day is only half the story. The other half emerges when the sun sets and the real watchers take their post, standing guard over mysteries we're not meant to solve, bearing witness to loops that never end, and learning that sometimes the scariest thing isn't what lurks in the darkness. It's the realization that the darkness has always been there, patient and eternal, just waiting for you to clock in and discover what it's been hiding all along.